Welcome, Gwen Gordon. It's great to see you, and I'm so glad you could join us in the Seekers Forum.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Mark.
You've had such a fascinating career. I mean, you started out designing and building Muppets for Sesame Street, and then you went from that to being a kind of philosopher of play and a play coach. And now I know you're working with psychedelics and with trauma. So I'd just like to start with the play stuff. And tell me, how did you talk about that trajectory? How you got interested in play and how it led to the Muppets work and how that went to the philosophy of play for you?
Sure. So I wasn't actually, I mean, I was just a child playing, right? So it wasn't like I was thinking about play. I was really just, I mean, I ended up at Muppets at 19, so it was like I had been creating my whole childhood. I was doing soft sculpture, making my own clothes. I had written an illustrated children's book um as my college application. So like it was already, it was just that was I had a creative life and and an intellectual life. I was at Wesleyan. I was studying American studies, women's studies. It's just I was also thinking a lot. And when I got to Muppets, I was actually taking classes at night at the New School, deconstructing critical theory. So I'd be constructing Muppets during the day and deconstructing them at night. And it was really, always those threads, also spiritual threads, were always there. It's just different things got foregrounded at different times. So Muppets was a whole that turned into a whole thing. And I mean, there's lots of stops along the way. Well, I won't go into it, but the philosophy part, I guess, the direct connection was after after starting a children's multimedia company, Creatures at Large, and producing programs for children with AIDS, children in hospitals. um, I I started to the project that I had really brought me to a lot of technology centers. I was working at Xerox PARC with scientists and researchers at Xerox PARC to create this huge global community puzzle, which was a whole different project. But because of that connection, I ended up as an artist in residence at Xerox PARC for 9 months, and I was partnered with a research scientist. And I was just supposed to be kind of designer chaos. I was like, it was part of this whole knowledge ecology phase that they were in, where they were really just trying to disrupt and like foment interesting thinking and cross-pollinate. And they had anthropologists and all kinds of people there. And I was thrown in as an artist to have conversations that were more challenging or just to bring another perspective. But I got to do anything I wanted. And what I wanted to do was really understand what are the conditions in which innovation arises and creativity. And I was looking at cosmology. I started looking, watching Brian Swimm's Canticle of the Cosmos. I was looking at Ken Wilber. I was looking at all these different lenses and meta lenses. And I was working with my dreams. I was making art. I was just trying to really explore. And I had a research scientist partner, Don Kimber. So we were playing together. And um, in that process, I started to really get interested in like the most essential dynamics of evolution, which is an innovation. And those started to appear as play. And I ended up in the philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness program at CIAS and continued studying. And it was really like after 4 years, it was even clearer than it was before that when we participate in evolutionary dynamics, it's through like we do it in multiple ways, but play is one of them, and it's a really essential one. So it really became it was more philosophy and cosmology and understanding how um, how we as humans evolve and the creativity, the inherent creativity and innovation that's like at the center of that, which is play.
Gwen, as a child, were you particularly unusually whimsical and incorrigible and mischievous?
It's an interesting question because I mean, the answer is I was playful and I was also in a lot of pain as a child. And in some ways, some of my play impulse, like why I was particularly filtering for or sensitive to like the play frequency was because my playful nature was really, um, you know, thwarted by trauma and by, everybody has wounds on the playground. Like this is where we want to be freest. And so we really sensitive to where we aren't. And yeah, so I would say, yes, I'm an inherently playful person, but I wouldn't conflate playfulness with the kind of play that I'm talking about. Like a lot of people, yes, that is definitely connected to my pursuit and of understanding the whole inquiry around play. And um it's not necessarily like what it means to be what it means to participate in the play that I'm talking about doesn't necessarily involve being mischievous. But yeah, okay, I was.
Okay, I was waiting for you to get there. I
I don't have I guess I'm expressing a little bit of an antibody against uh, like identities of play where, play has to look a certain way.
oh, I see what
Um,
you're saying. I see what you're saying.
that's
Yeah,
where I like back off. Like, yeah, okay, I was, but so my sister was making model airplanes and very, seemed very serious about it. And,
yeah,
like
yeah. So let's get back to what you were saying about the philosophy of play and the principles of innovation. You've said that the same dynamics that produce novelty in the cosmos are present in the artist studio, in a jazz music jam, and on the preschool playground. Can you talk about what are some of those dynamics that are universal, inherent to play, and also inherent to the creation?
yeah. So it starts with like the universe is trying everything. It's just like there's no limits. It's just like wherever, I mean, within the basic principle laws of the universe, like the four forces, et cetera. But there's like, it's just wild experimentation, like unbridled, you know, try this, try this, try this. It didn't work. Like, well, wait, we can use this for another purpose. Like, these fins emerged in fish, but we can probably turn them into wings for play for birds. And
Birds.
there's a whole like, you know, improvisational, and the impulse is just coming from the froth of the life force. Like it's eros. It's just like, the desire to be in its fullness. So it's just like this, but it is following these, like, the jazz musician, it's not just wild cacophony. It's like sensing into where there are beautiful moments. Like I think of beauty and play as sort of the two sides of the same coin. It's like there's a tuning into like where are things really rich, and where do they create more coherence at this moment. And so there's this both and, like there's this wild experimentation,
Hmm.
leads to adaptive variability. That's a whole other evolutionary principle Stephen Jay Gould brought us, where we're actually, creating more possibilities for play. It's what keeps the field open. It's like, so we're participating in evolutionary dynamics when we're playing in ways that increase the potential for more play.
Mm.
Don't turn into these evolutionary dead ends.
Say that. What was the last thing you said? Sorry.
And don't become these like dead ends, these evolutionary dead ends, like which happens when rigidification. And so by staying flexible and open and available for
Mm.
meeting each thing as a potential playmate, not as a threat, which closes
Mm.
things down. Those are the conditions in which we continually increase the possibilities for more play.
Right, right. And that has parallels, obviously, with spirituality and spiritual practice. So many of the dynamics and the principles of play that I read about in your work are direct mirrors of what we're doing on the path of awakening. Can you
Totally.
talk a little bit about that interface? You say something beautiful. You say that when we play, we catch a glimpse of our unbounded true nature, which is so beautiful. Can you say something a little more about the interface between play and spiritual life?
Absolutely. Um, Yeah, it's funny. You've read my work much more recently than I have.
That always happens.
And it's funny. It's a strange experience to actually be touched by my own words. It's like, oh, I said that. Um, yeah. So, one of the stories I like to tell about how I got interested in play had to do with when I was about in my 20s, and I was on my way to an ashram to live at Kripalu for a few years. And my sister was a world champion freestyle skydiver 5 years in a row, a women's world champion. And she convinced me to jump out of an airplane with her. And so, the instructor, you have a tandem master, so you're it's strapped to somebody, and then there's the instructor says there are only two things to remember. Let go of the airplane wing and breathe. And by the way, hold on, went to the ripcord because they cost $25 and we hate it when we lose them. So, we get up, the plane is like a sardine can. It's like rattling like crazy. I'm not sure like if I'm safer in it or out of it. It's time, we sidle over to the airplane wing like beetles in heat, too little. And we hold on and he goes, let go. And everything in my body and like 150 million years of genetic memory is saying absolutely under no circumstances whatsoever let go. I let go, and it's just an explosion of sensation. I'm just like, getting knocked around and overwhelmed. No one told me how cold it would be, how loud it would be. Have you ever jumped out of an airplane?
Never, ever.
Yes. Well, maybe you won't have to after I explain if you hear this story. So anyway, I'm just like completely overwhelmed. And um I see my sister, and she's like, oh, doing these like acrobatics and like just like an animal released from captivity. I mean, she's just like, wow. And she comes over, she swoops over, she gives me a kiss on the cheek, and then she leaves. And I'm like, what was that second thing? Oh, right, breathe. You know. So I'm just like a hunk of biomass, like succumbing to gravity. And she's just this like gorgeous, um, flying dancer. And we land safely. Oh, by the way, I'm holding on to the ripcord, and eventually the tandem master says you can let go of my thumb now. I just didn't want them to lose $25. So anyway, so I end up going to the ashram, Kripalu, and at that time is, Amrit Desai, Gurudev, and this is before the Guru bubble burst. And it wasn't like I was ready. I never took him as my guru, just as a caveat, but I remember the teachings were very clear. Like basically the only two things he said is let go and breathe. And I was like, that's it. And what I was seeing is like what it would be like to live in free fall, but without the fear and the bracing that I had when I was falling. It was like, oh, and my sister in free fall was sort of like, wow, what if you could live with that much uncertainty, that much release, that much surrender, and be dancing and just enjoying yourself and relaxed and, on the way. And it occurred to me that, the people I know who are most spiritually mature are in that state, and they're the most playful, and everything is play. It's not to be braced against. It's to be welcomed and included into the playground. And so I started to ask myself, if, and this is, I was, very deeply committed to my own spiritual path by then. I wanted to understand, well, if when we're free, the way spiritually free, we're free to play, then can we play our way free? Is it both the path and the destination? And that really guided my work for a long time, that inquiry. I tried everything. I was like, what kind of play? Is it chess? Is it badminton? Is it, what kind of play? And what is it, the state that different play creates that is connected to awakening? And it became clear that no, not all play is connected to freedom. And even so, that's when the distinction between finite and infinite play that James Carse offers was so helpful. And so, yes, finite, infinite play, which is play that is includes everything. Its purpose is to continue the play, um, and uh, there's no winner or loser, versus finite, which is the opposite. So I made these distinctions myself between, play that comes from different mindsets, where there is more infinite or finite play, and um, so the distinctions I made were associated with like how we see the world and how safe we feel, because we are free to the extent that we feel safe. So if we don't feel safe, we probably like, if we're very insecure, we see the world as a battleground where everything's a threat. If we're have ambiv and this is connected to attachment styles. So if we're anxious, if our sense of safety was very conditional and we had to test it and we were tested, and then the world is a proving ground where you have to continually prove that we're safe and find safety and feel anxious about it. And that's when the world becomes a proving ground, and different kinds of play are appeal on a proving ground, competitive sports. And I mean, that's all kinds of play can appeal on the three playgrounds. The last mindset is the playground mindset, where everything is included in the play. And that has to do with ultimate sense of safety, which is really what comes with awakening. So, so yeah, and so then I was really testing, well, and I tried lots of different play groups and workshops, and can we play with the obstacles to play? How far can that go? If we turn our fear or our sense of making fools of ourselves or wasting time into an object. So those tend to be the classic, obstacles to play. Turn those into objects of play and see if we can exaggerate them, and how, turn them into characters, or that can take us a certain distance. But ultimately, the obstacles to play are such a deep sense of unsafety that was embedded in our system, in our earliest experiences as trauma. Um, that's really, so my answer was no. Play is can take us a certain distance, and it's necessary for healthy life. We need to stay flexible. We need, it's even if we're on the battleground, proving, or playground, but it doesn't necessarily take us into the next mindset. We're on the battleground and we're playing, we might catch a glimpse of the proving ground or of some relative freedom. It's definitely a freer space in whatever mindset we're in, because we get to be in control of being out of control. And we're actually longing to be out of control, even though we're terrified of it. So there's both, so we get to like have little pockets of where we can tell ourselves that there are no long-term consequences to what we're doing, and we can take risks. And that happens on each level. But ultimately, we're going to face the deepest obstacles to play, which have to do with the ways that we experience the world as unsafe when we were pre-verbal.
Let's keep going because that was really beautiful. So what I was going to say is, in the same way that the battleground intimidates us and makes us feel less free, and as does the proving ground, I was going to ask you about how play has been thwarted in modern life in general, in similar ways to how spiritual awakening and spiritual have been thwarted by modern life. What are the qualities in our culture that stand against the spirit of play and the spirit of awakening, in your opinion?
Yeah, most of them. Maybe it's easier to say what doesn't, or actually it would be hard. Yeah, no, we live on a proving ground and battleground, increasingly a battleground. I mean, I think what the insecurity, we're all starting the increase in threats, and polarization are qualities of a battleground. Very strong language about finite play, about winning and losing, and not everybody gets to play. And so when that threat is present, and that of course isn't just out there, it seeps into family. I mean, I'm really aware of how I wrote a paper on the genesis of future playfulness, which, really connects the capacity to live on a playground and be free with the first experiences of childhood with attachment. So, I mean, we can see our world as having an attachment wound, so modernity. And even, I mean, modernity is so completely relies on exploitation and extraction and for constant growth. I mean, it's a finite game on the planet. It's not including the planet as a playmate, as in its subjectivity. So, I mean, in a way, we're in an infinite play. Like the interesting thing about finite and infinite play is that finite play can exist inside of infinite play, but infinite play can't exist inside of finite play.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way I hold it is that um, this is a finite game right now we're inside of, but it's inside of an infinite game.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more we can like identify with and participate in and find ourselves in connection to the infinite game, the less investment there is in the finite game. And it just, it can thin out. Um, but
Can I interrupt you for a moment? When you talk about an attachment wound, our culture has an attachment wound. Can you say what you mean by that?
yeah, I mean, when you consider like what are the sources of insecurity, like we're acting out of a lot of anxious attachment energy. So basically I mean you could look at it as an attachment wound with spirit and nature. Like there's a sense that we're disconnected, something happened and we're no longer safe, we're no longer like held in that unconditional love. Like something happened um, on a cultural level, not just individually, but like, and you could talk about it, you could see it as like the rise of agriculture when there were surpluses and suddenly we're controlling the, natural world. You could see it as, um, Jared Diamond. I mean, guns, germs, and steel, and it's based on like, there's lots of different ways to read it, but
Hmm.
ultimately it's like learning about your early childhood trauma by seeing what actually shows up in a relationship. It's like, oh, I didn't know I was so anxious. I didn't know I was. So it's sort of like, oh, well, that's pointing us when those symptoms show up in our personal lives, we're like, oh, well, maybe something happened really early on
Right.
that's causing me to behave this completely irrational and, deranged way. Well, we are behaving in a completely irrational and deranged way culturally, so as a society. And so I look at what is that? How is that an expression? And I mean the complete denial of entanglement of the depth of our interconnection
Mhm.
comes from, initial sense of separation from the bosom of, the larger life,
Mhm.
or,
Mhm. Right.
bosom or the womb, or just the connection to this like ultimate sense of safety that, um, yeah, that decentering the human and feeling ourselves really as part of this inherently, utterly entangled, interconnected, larger
And
living.
that expulsion is also mirrored in how spiritual life and spirituality have been subjugated and really is kind of put on the back burner in favor of the finite games that we're playing.
And just think of it, I mean, the emphasis on productivity and each achievement, and you are defined by how your performance and your productivity. I mean, capitalism is a finite game. It's completely overrunning the limitations, the carrying capacity. There are just so many finite games that
Mhm.
we are inside of and need to prove ourselves in order to deserve to play. Like people deprioritize play to survive capitalism and to be somebody and to feel their value within a cultural standards.
Right. And so the evolution is to move from proving ground to playground.
Yeah, isn't that great news?
It is it is great news. It is great news. So tell me, how does play put us in training for the unexpected? That's another
Oh yeah.
beautiful thing that you said.
Yeah, that training for the unexpected, I believe that was Mark Bekoff who first said that. He's a biologist, studied play in dogs and animals. So but it's training for the unexpected in that when like think of all the things that like one of the examples that's often used is like mountain goats that are um, just trying like they put themselves in kind of in by frolicking, you put yourself in positions and um, you know, attitudes that you wouldn't normally do. Like you, because you, it normalizes risks, you take risks and you try things that build new muscles and kind of help you feel comfortable with experiences that are out of the regular regimen of life. So it's like it breaks the frame of our habits and gives us a wider repertoire of possible responses to the world because we're actually trying new things already. So that's one way. You know, so then later on when that baby mountain goat is on a cliff, you know, and they stumble, they will have already practiced catching themselves 1,000 times because stumbling is part of the play of a baby goat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like that.
Got it.
And
And
that's all.
the same thing goes with acting out aggression,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
competitiveness and things that can turn toxic and nasty. Don't are they're risk free on the playground or on the
Yeah.
on the mountain in the mountain goats mountainside.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is true with with emotional and psychological possibility as much as the physical. It's like we're just building a wider repertoire by trying, like playing makeup, playing make believe, playing, be able to just like step inside a whole other kind of life identity and just try that on. You know, that's practice for empathy. That's practice for um, yeah, having different attitudes. It can lead to rigidifications as well. Like it's not necessarily there's just it's like the continued um breaking of your own frames makes you more uh adaptable. So trained for the unexpected.
You mentioned eros, and I wanted to ask you about playfulness and erotic life. It's always struck me that people take erotic life way too seriously, which is one of the reasons that it suffers. That more playfulness, more levity, more delight can bring down the barriers between people and use our imagination. How can play be used to not talking about improving the sex life. I'm talking about healing fears around eros, healing fears around intimacy and connection.
Oh gosh, I mean, I think like a sex and love coach would be like the right person to answer that question. I can give, you know, my perspective. I'm sure there are like really concrete examples about how as soon as you bring play in, you know, there's just a softening of the it's safer. You're just in a safer space where it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to cross lines. It's so you can recover, you can come back to the playground. It's like so like for any aspect of our lives, it's going to be it's also like in couple play with someone else, and that's all about sensitive attunement, you know,
Mm,
and finding the like a bigger space to move together than
mm,
you would in ordinary life. But that depends on always being attuned to the other's pain thresholds and you know, and where they, you know, like it's always a very intimate dance among dogs. Like you know, I have a puppy and it's just like I could watch forever the puppy play because some dogs handicap themselves and they're the big dogs. If they want to play, they just play with their heads and the other dog will just jump all over and they'll just, you know, so they find handicaps and ways to keep the play going because the play drive is so strong. So how that looks for a couples, I mean, I think it's just so healthy to just like role playing, like try on different identities, see what happens. Like give yourself permission. Like it's just a space of permission
mm.
where, you know, you have agreements about how to recover back to connection if connection is broken. I don't know. I think that, yeah, I think a sex
Yeah,
and love.
that's illuminating. That's really, really helpful. So you mentioned having a bigger, creating a bigger space. So that leads us to psychedelics. Can you give me a sense of how you got involved with psychedelic work, and how does it connect to these thoughts on play?
Yeah. Well, one of the ways that we break out of the frame, I mean, so neurobiologists would probably call that frame, that habitual frame, the default mode network, right? So there's like wiring in us that is just our our way of knowing ourselves and like the familiar self. Um, and the studies show that like creativity and play like takes some of that offline. So we're not in such a constant self-monitoring, like God, the relief of for a moment just not being ourselves. So psychedelics are also a way that we shift out of the default mode network and just completely broaden.
And let me just ask you two more questions before we cut off again, and I don't want to take more of your time. The first is, did you become interested in how did you go from play work to trauma work?
Yeah. Yeah. I I reached the limit of what I saw was possible. Like play for me was always about freedom, freedom and fullness, like being 100% here, allowing life to move through us. Um, one of the definitions of play is a rope has play when it has wiggle room. So like enabling movement of life. So I was always interested in play. Like evolution was awakening, was healing, was like all the connection to freedom and fullness, the ability to be fully connected and related, and also disidentified with it all. Fully, yeah. So, um, I I played out really how far I could go with play as a path, as a path toward freedom. It's always essential, but I also found myself kind of getting pigeonholed into like the play person. And then it's like the tyranny of fun where you have to be somebody. And I'm like, no, this is about everything. This isn't about a particular way of being. But also, I could see how the play work was really getting co-opted into capitalism, into the proving ground. Like I ended up the way I could earn a living was to bring play to the workplace. And that's people just wanted like basically a little pressure relief from the rat race to be able to be refreshed and come back and win. And like I just found myself, even play coaching was it's like turning into something that was enabling a system, a proving ground, um, and on the proving ground. So I found like actually where my heart is in the deepest healing and awakening. And where I saw the blocks to that were in what I mentioned earlier, were the early childhood trauma, developmental trauma, and I also became more of an activist, like both and it became more individual and collective because those and the activism wasn't about reforming capitalism to try to turn capitalism or patriarchy or the culture modernity into a playground. It was more like let the same kind of healing that I was doing on an individual level penetrate, move into the social dimension, seeing modernity as beyond reform. Like you don't get to the proving ground by being a better proving ground, like by including more people in the proving ground. It's a mindset and it comes from safety. So, and then that means safety for everybody, not just, those who are winning. So anyway, though there's just a more robust analysis and also just my own trauma healing. Like I played out what I could do with play. And it was like, oh, well, it keeps coming back to these core issues that are blocking my play. I need to attend to that. And that's what I can attend to for other people as well in my commitment to liberate their free play. And so I've been working with um, I always work with like somatic or psychedelic or dream work, which is outside the frame of our habitual like cognitive mind, which is like where the limitation, where all the coping strategies live. So um so that was so the playground, the therapeutic playground that I've been in has been deliberately, you know, more connected to primary processes, the body, non-cognitive processes, so outside the default mode network. And um,
Mm.
so in that sense, they're similar to the playground. Like we go to a place where the 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 identity can't really hold on to that much, so that something new can happen. And so those things can be healed. Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds fascinating. It just sounds like a natural outgrowth of what you've been doing all these years. Just one last question, Gwen. We find ourselves in this moment at a time of such disaster and doomsday thinking and people shutting down their imaginations and their playfulness. If we look at what's going on today through a play lens, what is one thing that we might do to open the appetite a little bit, to move, to remember the infinite play dimension of things, even in the midst of so much mess?
Mm. Well, one thing, there like two things pop to mind immediately. One is to feel everything, like to let our hearts really break for the world. Um, the fear that we won't survive the heartbreak is comes from that we're not safe if we don't. So it's like affirming that we can let our hearts break, and that's that we're safer for it. So it's like
Mm.
all about finding safety. And we do that together. It's like healing, like bringing back collective ritual, collective grief ritual, like coming together to feel more. That is really, so it's focused on unblocking. I mean, one of the things that's very hard to do in both healing and play is like when we're in a battleground, when there is real threat, it's like it's not time to play, you know? So, and a lot of people, we might feel a little less threat, but there are populations that are in like on the battleground for real. So it's um I would never say play more to those people. It's like I would say find safety. Like feel where you can find safety. And I think that's increasing. Like that will liberate play eventually if there is if that safety can be found spiritually or in community. Um, the other piece is so yeah, I want just to put a cap on that. I just really feel like the need right now for collective grief rituals and for coming together, in spaces that aren't politicized, um, whenever possible. Share food, like do the most primal things that like affirm our simplest level of connection, just
Yeah.
brotherhood, sisterhood. And then the other piece is like it's something that I'm right now studying with Josh Schrey, who's runs the Emerald podcast, and it's a mythic lens, but it's really it's animist practices. So it's about really connecting, decentering the human, because right now the human's in the middle of a battleground, but the natural world isn't in a battleground. It every spring, it's like the a fusion of play. I mean, it's like there's a deeper and bigger infinite playground that we really can connect with.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can take decentering the human and like getting into the larger conversation through all the reciprocity, like through the gratitude, through the hallelujah anyway, as Van Jones put it in one of the podcasts. Like, you know, African American black populations have been under siege for a long time, but they go to church and they hallelujah anyway. It's like we can find the hallelujah,
Yeah.
and it's the sort of, I mean, I start the day, I go outside barefoot and I just look at the sunrise. I get up at sunrise and just like, thank you. And I sing, thank you for this day. Oh, thank you for this day, and just I start to feel like, oh, what a gift.
Yeah.
Another day,
Yeah.
and just to get into the sense of receiving the gift of this life, and
Mm,
all the beauty and all the play that's around us all the time. So it's like sensing the larger playground.
mm, beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gwen. It's
It's
so great. It's great to speak to you.
it's wonderful to talk with you. Thank you for your excellent questions, Mark. It's really helped me feel connected to the play work that I've done, which is really
Profound. I was reading all of your, I mean, your interviews were really beautiful, so profound. So I hope you don't mind me putting you back on the philosopher.
I'll surrender whatever. I mean, maybe it's time. We'll see.
Maybe it's time. Maybe it's time. But and thanks for your patience with the stupid technology.
So it goes. I'll
All
find.
right.
Take good
See you. Take good care. Bye bye.